Good evening, everyone. I'm going to pretend that didn't happen. Good evening, everyone. Good to see everybody. Hunter is sick this evening, so our first song tonight will be number 77. After our prayer and our devotional, we'll have number 662 will be our song after the lesson. So I'll sing 77. Father, we love you, we worship and adore you. Glorify thy name in all the earth. Glorify thy name. Glorify thy name. Glorify thy name in all the earth. Jesus, we love you, we worship and adore you. Glorify thy name in all the earth. Glorify thy name. Glorify thy name. Glorify thy name in all the earth. Spirit, we love you, we worship and adore you. Glorify thy name in all the earth. Glorify thy name. Glorify thy name. Glorify thy name in all the earth.
Good evening, everyone. If you would, please bow with me. Dear Lord, thank you so much for this opportunity for us to come together in the middle of the week and just learn more about you and your word. Lord, I just pray that you'll be with the friends and families that are in this congregation, and I just pray that you'll be with our leadership. I pray, Lord, that every one of us will take something from tonight's lesson and tonight's period of worship. It's in your holy name that we ask these things, Jesus. Amen.
Miss Lunita has asked me to make an announcement. Sherry's run approaches. She's going to make another t-shirt order that says Go Joe in honor of Joe Whitey and the team here at Maple Hill for that day. And so if you've not had a t-shirt or you want one, you can come see her, and you need to find her tonight, hopefully. And it's $10 for that t-shirt. So I think I'm going to order me one. Through the years, like many of you, I have had the opportunity to hear a variety of motivational speakers. And one of my favorites has been this guy right here. Can you tell me who it is? His name is Zig Zigler. So some of these heads are going up and down, and some are going, who is that? Well, Zig Ziglar was really one of the guys that helped start the craze back in the 60s. And he helped, along with a few other guys, set up this nationwide program for motivational speakers. And I've got to hear him, 3-4 times or so in my life. About 15 years ago, I was down in Nashville and I got to hear old Zig speak again. And I'd heard some of the things he'd said I'd heard before, and some of the special quotes that he uses to encourage and motivate people. I heard some of those, but this time it was a little bit different. There was something I caught, and maybe it had been there before, but I didn't realize it. He had, and I've seen this before, but he had 30 characteristics of a good worker. And maybe you've seen this list, and there's the list right there. And he had that on the big screen, and he's doing his spiel, and he's talking, and he's, everybody's hooped up. And I looked at that list, and something stood out to me, and I want to see if you catch it right now. Is there anything interesting, anything different, anything that stands out? Now realize that when he was speaking to a business crowd, people of the world trying to make lots and lots of money, people that lived and worked in the real world, and he wasn't allowed to preach. Anybody found it yet? The last line on all three, on all three columns, if you look at the last word. And it stood out to me, and for the next 15 minutes while he continued to talk, I kept thinking about this. And he was saying, he was preaching to this crowd about integrity and characteristics and faith, hope, and love. And that just has stuck with me ever since then, that this fella who's a motivational speaker in these businesses that make billions and billions of dollars and is money driven, and here he is standing up there talking about godly virtues, whether they realized it or not. And I've always appreciated that. 1 Corinthians 13:13. And now these three remain, faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. Faith is something that we need now, inwardly, outwardly, reliance on God. But faith will end when Jesus comes back. You won't have to have faith in something that's there, because it's there. Hope is the same way. We have hope in heaven. We have hope that Jesus will come back. We have hope for all these things, but it too will end. But the only thing that will remain forever is love. Love has been there since before the creation of the world, and it will continue for all eternity. Love is most important. Love is greatest. And we read these words in Jesus' prayer the night before he dies, the night before he's crucified, John 15:13. Jesus says to his apostles, "Greater love has no one than this, that laid down one's life for one's friends." And that's exactly what Jesus has done for us. And not only has he done that, but look at the last little phrase on that. He calls us his friends. We're not just people that serve him. We're not just people that honor him. We're just not beneath him. But he lifts us up to the position of his friends. Those of us who have been washed in the blood of Christ have been adopted into the family of God. We are adopted brothers and sisters in God's family. That's his promise. That's his love. And don't you want to share in that love too? Sometimes we need encouragement because the world just knocks us down. We don't feel like we have any friends. We don't feel like we're loved. We're lonely. Maybe there's somebody here tonight that's not yet taken hold of that promise. You know you need to be baptized. You're ready to have your sins washed away in the blood of Christ. If there's anything that we can do for you tonight, we ask that you come now as we stand and sing.
Oh, to Jesus I surrender, all to him I freely give. I will ever love and trust him in his presence daily live. I surrender all. I surrender all to thee, my blessed Savior. I surrender all to Jesus. I surrender, humbly at his feet I bow. Worldly pleasures all forsaken, take me, Jesus, take me now. I surrender all. I surrender all to thee, my blessed Savior. I surrender all to Jesus. I surrender, Lord. I give myself to thee. Fill me with thy love and power. Let thy blessing fall on me. I surrender all. I surrender all to thee, my blessed Savior. I surrender all. Before we're dismissed to our classes tonight, we'll sing number 768. Thank you. Jesus, let us come to know you. Let us see you face to face. Touch us, hold us, use us, mold us. Only let us live in you. Jesus, draw us ever nearer. Hold us in your loving arms. Wrap us in your gentle presence when the end comes. Bring us home. You're dismissed to your classes.
let me invite everyone to go ahead and pick you up a book. They're free. Just grab you one. If we run out on the tables there, we've got plenty more. If I need to bring you one, just raise your hand.
Let's see. All right, that's exactly how I wanted to start, by running through the slides in reverse. So I've got to say real quick, this is a project, this is a night that has been 3 years in the making for me. Just if you aren't familiar with why we're doing this study and why a 40-year-old person is talking about retirement, let me just put a little context. About 3 years ago, I started having this idea. I saw some friends of mine that were retiring, and I saw a very common theme. Most people were not retiring well. And we'll talk a little bit about that in more detail here in a second. But so I had this idea for a book, but I could not write it. I was 37 back then, so I can't write that book. So I needed an author, and that's when Mr. White came into the picture. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I have a few, if some of you all have been in some of my classes before, and I like to start with something that just kind of makes us chuckle, because I really want you all to talk. So I'm putting some of these in here just to kind of get us laughing a little bit, because you don't want to hear a 40-year-old person talk about retirement, okay? I need to hear what you have to say about retirement. So hopefully this will kind of lighten the mood and get us all talking. But I saw this the other day, and I can relate to this. Y'all ever see this where you try to put your USB drive in, and that's not the right way, it's the wrong way. So then you flip it over. That's the wrong way too. You go back to the original way, and all of a sudden it's correct. Y'all ever have that happen? And maybe you've had a bad day today. Well, I hope it's not as bad as Tom McEldrin's day, who asked to remain anonymous, and apparently that request was denied. I saw this, and I thought it was kind of cute, but when I showed it to my wife, she really enjoyed it. The Tibetan sand fox carries the same resting expression as a wife who's heard her husband's latest joke. And I see that expression on some of your faces right now. So, finally, I always like a good Pinterest fail. You know, this is somebody saw this looks easy. I can do this. I can make this. You know, and this is how it turned out. So, not quite But this is kind of why we're here. I think we live in a world right now where everything on social media makes things look perfect, and you get this impression that it's easy. I can do that. And then you try it, and yours doesn't turn out like that. And that can be any stage of life, but especially retirement. You see people who are retiring well, they're getting along with their spouses, they're traveling, they're doing all these things that you want to do, but when you try it, it ends up like this, right? So that's why we're here today, to just talk about the real things that go on when we transition into retirement. So before we get real started into this, I'm not going to cover the first chapter. This book is written in 13 chapters. Mr. Whiteick wanted to do that. It was very intentional because when I talked to him about this, one of the observations I'd made was when you get married, you have premarital counseling through the church. When you have a baby, the church is there to give you baby showers. There's all sorts of parenting classes, and there's support from the church in all these life transitions. And in retirement, there is support there, but it's primarily from a financial standpoint, which is, don't hear me say that that's not important. It certainly is important. But there's an identity crisis that goes on when you make that transition. And I feel like there's a great opportunity for the church to play a role here. Mostly because, well, I'm going to get into statistics later, but there's 40 million baby boomers that are going to retire by 2035. What if that's the growth catalyst of the church? And he agreed with that, and so he decided, I'm going to write this in a way that we can do a quarterly study on this. So even though it is a 13-chapter book, there's going to be 12 classes because one of the weeks is the day before Thanksgiving. And we're going to just do an intro today, so that gives you a chance to go and read a couple chapters, and we'll combine a couple chapters along the way. But the chapters are short, easy to read. I think you're going to enjoy it. You're probably going to have a hard time putting it down, I think, if you're like me. So, John, my father-in-law and I are co-teaching this class. And a big part of that is because, again, I can't tell you anything about retirement. I haven't done it. I did park in the reserve for senior parking tonight, so that's as close as I can relate. But John, my father-in-law, has one of the few that I know personally who has made that transition well. And we've talked about at length about all the themes that are in this book. So I asked him to be a part of this study. Ideally, when me and Mr. Whiteick were dreaming this night up, it was going to be him teaching you. And so you're going to have to put up with John and I. We're going to do the best we can to honor the words that he's written. But at the end of the day, I think John would agree to this. You're not listening to Brandon and John here. You're listening to Joe. And if Joe was here, he would say, you're really listening to God, because as he described the process of writing and the way it fell into place, I know that he felt like God was working through him in that effort.
I want to say just a few words here. I think no, it's not on. He's working on it. Check 1, 2. It's the yellow one. Check. 1, 2. Check. Check. Hey, we're good now. We're good, thank you. Okay, before I talk about Joe, I'd like to mention just a couple of things. One, Brandon said something about co-teaching. That's not the truth. Brandon's the teacher here. I'm just his sidekick. He needed an old person that was retired. I fit both of those. You know, I'm old, I'm retired. So when he needs a comment for an old retired guy, yeah, unless y'all will talk, I'll say something. Hopefully y'all will do the talking when it comes to that. He's the brains of the outfit. Let me tell you what happened yesterday. You remember that first slide, Tom McEldroon, who asked to remain anonymous? Well, the day before yesterday, Brandon sent me the slides, and I'm trying to open them up on my phone, and I read that, and it didn't really make sense to me. It just went right over my head. And yesterday, I got on my computer, opened it up on my computer. It still looked the same. I thought, what is the deal with this? Tom McElderry, who has to remain anonymous. And then this line around the slide covered up the next sentence. And then the last part said, "Construction plan near his holiday home area." I didn't get it. Right over my head. And then under is a big article, Tyrconnell Stone Festival, which takes place every year around the... I don't know anything about a stone festival. Does that have anything to do with this article before? And I'm just racking my brain trying to figure out what is going on here. And I just didn't make any sense. I don't see the joke. So finally, I get on, I text Brandon, I don't get it. And I hit send. When I hit send, I see Tom McElderry and I see anonymous. So, well, now Brandon knows he's working with an idiot. What can I say? You know, that's what he's got to work with up here. So I'm just a sidekick. Hopefully all I'll be doing is handing this mic around so y'all can speak, okay? Is there anything else? I think not. Let's talk about Joe for just a minute. I remember years ago, we had a speaker that spoke in his sermon about heroes. And I'll never forget it. He says, everybody should have some heroes in your life. And I've thought about that a lot. And Joe was one of my heroes. Absolutely. One of my favorite heroes. He's the kind of person that I always wanted to be. Nothing was ever about him. It was always about others. And there was nothing he wouldn't do for anybody. It was just always about somebody else. Just one of the best people I ever knew. Did you ever wonder, did you ever want to know, what would it be like to be able to walk around and be with Jesus when he was on earth? I've wondered that. What would it be like to actually walk around and talk and be with Jesus? And I realized it's just like being with Joe. It's being with Joe. And so we've had that. Those of us that know him, we've had that opportunity. We really have. What a blessing it was to know Joe White. Okay, Brandon, it's all yours, buddy.
I think class is dismissed after that. I talked to a lot of people about this book, and somebody asked me, how did you pick Joe to write it? And I actually said, well, I had visited a friend of mine who likes art, and he had a piece of art in his home, and I said, tell me about this. And he said, well, I saw this design somewhere, and I wanted to commission somebody, so I commissioned someone to make a replica of it. And I thought, well, that's what I need to do with this book. I need to commission somebody to write this book for me. And I went around for 6 to 9 months trying to figure out who that person was going to be. And when I ran into Joe, it just was like a slap across the face. And so when I tried to answer, how did I pick Joe? It was kind of like, well, I didn't really. I mean, it was just, there was no one else. I mean, here's a guy who retired well and could also communicate that. He was such a good teacher. And so I asked him, what do you think about writing this book? And he said, well, I've always wanted to write a book, but I didn't think it'd be about retirement. I don't even know where to start. And then a week later, he said, I think the theme needs to be, we don't retire out of something, we retire into something. And I was like, man, of course, that's it. You know, that when you think about the retirement parties you've been to, the gifts are golf clubs and fishing poles and beach chairs and everything about leisure. And it is this idea of you're retiring out of something. The work is done. You don't have to contribute anymore. Just relax and enjoy life. But we're just not built for that. In your introduction, you'll read that Mr. Whitey had this verse as the theme verse for the intro from 2 Corinthians 9:12. This service that you perform is not only supplying the needs of God's people, but it is also overflowing in the many expressions thanks to God. And I didn't really understand at first when I read that why he would put that. I guess I was thinking in terms of your retirement, the things you do in your life are going to be expressions of thanks to God. But at the end of his intro, he says, I'm writing this not to be famous, not to be wealthy, not to be on the bestseller list, but I'm writing this as a service to God and to thank him for what he's done in my life. And so I think that you'll see that throughout the book. But I want to ask you all, what's your experience about retirement? I mentioned to you some observations I was making. I knew people who were in good health and they retired, and in a few years, some of them died. Some of them, they passed away. And there was no indication that they were in poor health. I've talked to people, I feel like that's a common theme, but some people, they fall immediately into bad health. I know people who've had relationship problems, primarily in their marriages for the first time. When you're at work all day, you're not around your spouse all day long. And so I knew one person who, he actually came back to work 3 times. And I asked him once, why? What are you doing here? And he said, if I stayed home all day, I'd either kill my wife or divorce her. And so I kind of laughed, and he did not smile. Okay. So and I've known people that have gotten divorced after retirement. I also know people that have gone back to work. They get bored, and so they can't fill what they were getting at work, and I want to explore why that is. Now, interesting here for me, this is just my own experience, a small sample set. You all may have different experiences, but the financial piece, there are people that have financial issues in retirement, but the vast majority of people that I know have not encountered that. And I wonder sometimes if there's an intention. I mean, a lot of people, they are intentionally building that financial retirement nest egg. And so I wonder if maybe what's happening on the first 3, there's just not that intentionality behind it that there is on the 4th one. So what are your all's experiences? And it doesn't have to be just in your own retirement. Perhaps you know people you've witnessed, you've observed. What are your observations or your firsthand experience?
You don't want me to talk. Somebody raise your hand.
When my husband was working and he became eligible to retire, there were a lot of other men in the same position, but they were staying in their job to keep insurance to take care of their grandchildren because their parents were not responsible.
Yeah, you know what? That's a great point. I've got 2 kids in elementary school, and I know that just when I go to visit the school, they have different events. There's a lot of grandparents that are raising grandkids right now. So some people are retiring and then going right into raising kids. I think along that same line, there are people who retire and their parents are immediately facing illness. And so they go into well care for their own parents. So these are things we don't expect, right? We have this ideal image, kind of like that chocolate cupcake dog, and we think it's going to turn out that way, and then something happens. And there's things in this book that talk about those kinds of events that we don't plan for, that we don't expect.
I myself was forced into retirement in my early 50s due to a real bad car accident. And my wife was still working, and I was getting Social Security for a permanent disability. And My wife eventually passed away in 2015, so I'm all by myself right now.
I feel bad even commenting on some of these things because I'm so far removed. So please, if I step on toes or I come off rude by doing so, bear with me. But loneliness, I think, is the number one thing that we've got to protect against in retirement. There's a Harvard study, and I think some of you all have heard me say this multiple times. You're tired of hearing me say it. But there's a Harvard study that's gone on 80 plus years. They measured these people's lives from infancy, and they were trying to track what is the thing that contributes the most to happiness. And what they found were relationships. In fact, they said the people they were the most satisfied in their relationships at age 50, they had the best physical health at age 80. Now, I think this is the main reason I like having this class in church, because a lot of the folks that I know, John included, they have their connection. They have family, but they also have their church family, and that's what we want to be, right? We're not church friends, we're church family here. And I think that there's a reason God made the church, so we can help out with that loneliness. So certainly we have to be aware of that, and we need to, for those of us who are not facing that, we need to, I think, always remember what, I guess, I don't know my Bible as well as you all probably think, but is it James who says that the gospel is taking care of widows and orphans? And that just, anyone that's lonely. I want to give you a heads up on what you can expect in this series. And I tried to break things down usually into 3 categories. It's just easier to remember that way. But the first one, I think, we'll do some reflection. The book is it's into 2 sections. One is planning for, you're on the verge of retirement. The other one is now that you're in retirement. But for those of you, I see a lot of you in here that are not in retirement age and won't be for the next few years. I want you to know that these principles apply. The theme here is we need to number our days. And we need to think about in Ecclesiastes when Solomon says there's a time to do this and there's a time to do that. And I think that we almost need to think about life stage transition. All of us deal with that regardless of whether you're young married or you're on the verge of retirement. Your life changes as you transition. And I've been guilty in my own life of wanting to live in the previous stage and not own up to the fact that I'm in this stage. Or I want to live in that stage and I'm not there yet. So there will be some reflection on how did we get there. I did not even know that this verse was in there, but King David in Psalm 37:25, he says, if I can find it, I was young and now I'm old, yet I've never seen the righteous forsaken or their children begging bread. They're always generous and lend freely. Their children will be blessed. Solomon was the wisest man in the world, and God gave him that wisdom, but I also think part of the way God gave him that wisdom is he gave him David as a father, and I think David bestowed to Solomon. So David's he was a wise king as well. And part of that wisdom comes from reflection. There's going to be a lot of intentionality. A verse that I like to think about is when Jesus is appointed at Bethany. And I think about this in terms of me having kids that are a young age. Because there are times when I hear everybody else saying, have you watched this new series on Netflix? And I'm like, no, I watched Bluey again. But Jesus, when he's anointed, people start to give criticism to the person who anointed him. And Jesus' response is, because they said, you could have sold that and given the money to the poor. And Jesus' response is, you'll always have the poor, but you won't always have me with you. And I think about my own life, what is it that I have right now in my life stage that I won't always have with me? I have a 12-year-old son, and in 6 years, he's not going to be at home every night. And you all have things in your life right now that you won't have 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road. Life transitions happen, and I think we need to be aware of this. And then there's going to be a challenge to, and I hate the word challenge. It's not a challenge, there is a theme here of contribution and taking a countercultural approach to retirement. The reason I say challenge is because Matthew 7:13, enter through the narrow gate. We know, and if you agree with me and your observation is like mine, that the majority of people do not retire well, then it would be silly for us to go through the wide gate that everyone else does and try to retire like everyone else. But if we know that there are some people who do it well and they're the exception, then we need to go down that narrow path. And as I asked Mr. Wydick, we've taken and broadcast this class offering to all over the community, because my thought is that even if you're not someone who is connected with the church, we have a lot of folks that have moved here recently from outside the area, and this is something that they can benefit from, even if they're not ready to be a faithful follower. I mean, our hope would be that they would, but this is something that they can put into their life, and I think it would be God's will for us to share that with them. And when me and Mr. Wydick are thinking about this, we always knew it was going to be a book that's biblically based, but it's not that we took the Bible, he took the Bible and built the foundation out of it. He just thought, what is the best way to do this? And the best way is built on biblical principles. So there will be some of that. And I think if you look at this, there's kind of this theme of past, present, and future. And as we think about the intentionality piece, that's kind of the present. How do I live in the present? The key to joy is living in that present moment. It's challenging, and Jesus says, don't worry. He's trying to tell you. It's interesting when he says his prayer, give us today our daily bread. How do I focus on today and not worry about tomorrow? So there will be some challenges like that. John, what other themes that you, as you've read through the book, what other themes do you expect folks will get out of this?
He's the smart one. What are the themes? Well, one thing that I hope we get out of this are what are some of the things that we're going to look forward to that maybe will surprise us that are good? And what are some of the things that we expect that really are not going to be there? We may have some expectations that are, let's call them foolish. They won't be there. And but there will be surprises. There will be good surprises, and there will be bad surprises. And maybe this will help us to get thinking about these things and realize that there are some important things here that will really help us, and hopefully will help some other folks as well. We're going to see a lot of opportunities to help other people, I think, from this book. And when you help other people, you'll be surprised how that will help your life. It'll give you some real, true happiness.
So now you have to talk again. What do you hope to get out of this series? And maybe you just take the book and you don't come back next week. I have no hard feelings. But if you stay, what do you hope to get out of it?
I you kind of hit on this a minute ago, but one of the things that I anticipate I'm going to be dealing with, not only at this point in retirement, but leading up to retirement, is caretaking, not only for my mother and father, but for my aunt and her husband who had no children, as well as a cousin who had no children. And I'm the only child. I have Nicole to help me, but occasionally I can get on her last nerve. So sometimes it's just going to be a little old me. So one of the things I hope to get out of this is how to prepare for those things that I can anticipate while not getting depressed about it.
Well, I can tell you that John and Faye both have done a lot of taking care of folks that aren't even, some of them weren't even related to them. Some of them went right here to Maple Hill, and some of you all helped with that. There were families here that as they reached the end of their life, they didn't have, their kids or their grandkids were elsewhere, and they didn't have anyone else to take them to appointments, be power of attorney, all those things. So, Tom, I appreciate you bringing that up, because I'm going to really put it on John to lead that one. I think that it's, but he's got the experience, so. What else?
Hey, got a live one here.
Well, you started off by, you just breezed over it, identity crisis. And I struggled with that. I've been retired for 8 years, but the first 2 years, and even now, because I loved what I did. It was who I was. And I invested, you know, I took my greatest joy from it. I took my greatest pride from it. I did church work. I loved my children and was the best mother I knew how. But what I was this thing over here, you know. So when I retired, I'm not anybody anymore. You know, who am I? I don't know who I am. And even today, 8 years later. So I'm hoping somewhere in here we'll talk about how to find yourself and establish another identity, that you know who you are.
Man, if we don't do that, then I fail, because it's here. I think that there's the key to that is inside this book. And I've known people who've retired, Joe, and they'll say, that place ain't going to last a year without me. And guess what happens? It does. What a blow to the ego, right? I mean, goodness me. So, what you said is a great segue, because there are going to be 3 themes that we're going to have throughout this series. And it's funny when you think about these 3. The first one is purpose. The second one's relationships. And the third one is legacy. And it's really interesting when you think about this in terms of the workplace, because these things are very defined. When you go to a job, you have a title. My name is so-and-so, and I am the blank. People know exactly what you do. You contribute something that no one else contributes, and people count on you to contribute. You have that purpose laid out for you. Relationships. Not only do you know your coworkers and you get to know them and that sort of thing, but you depend on them. You work with them. You are successful because of them, or sometimes in spite of them, but you achieve things together and you're part of a team. And then you think about legacy. When you do retire, there is that thought of, maybe you don't go so far as to say, well, that place ain't going to last without me, but you probably think, I'm leaving this place better than I found it. And I have made a difference here. And so when you go away from the workplace into retirement, these are not as easily defined. And I've seen, and I know you've seen too, where people, they know these things. I think deep down in our heart we know that these are the things we need, and so they try to inject themselves in ways, and maybe they see their neighbor does this, so I'll try that too, but it doesn't fit them as well. We're all unique, and we all have these unique contributions. So I think what we want to do is start to think about retiring into a new purpose, in new relationships, and a new legacy. And I think that's going to help us to be feeling a lot more fulfilled and satisfied with how we're living. I have an example of this, and you probably can't read that, can you? Has anybody heard the story of the guy who stuffed the note in his beekeeping outfit? Anybody see this? It didn't go real viral, but I loved it. I think it should have gone viral. So there was a lady who was going through her dad's stuff. He'd been gone for 9 years, and he used to do beekeeping. And she was going through his beekeeping outfit, and inside one of the pockets was stuffed this note. It says, "I hope this note is found by one of my children who is curious about beekeeping. Beekeeping is actually pretty easy, and you can learn everything you need to know online. Bees make more products than just honey, and as a hobby, it can be a source of extra income. So don't be afraid, have courage, good luck, love, Dad." This is a guy who took a hobby, not anything huge, not anything big, not any grand work, just his hobby. And he found a way to make purpose out of it, to extend it to his relationships, and to leave a legacy. So we can do this. You don't have to feel like you have to have a certain amount of talent to do these things. We can do it. We just got to figure out how. What other thoughts do you have? Yes, sir.
When I first retired, it was because I had had 5 bypasses, and my wife told me, "You need to quit." I'm still not fully retired, but Katrina went through New Orleans, and a small town outside of New Orleans was totally wiped out. A group of young people from Lebanon Road went down there, and they came back all excited. We needed to go down there and work and everything. I was an elder, and I said, "I got to go see what's going on." And I went down there, and we traveled down there 2 or 3 years. At the end, well, before we quit going, a town that had never had a congregation now had a congregation. The congregation had a building that was totally paid for and a full-time preacher. So we went down and we did a lot of good work, and I really felt great about that.
Yeah, it drives us. I mean, I think in some ways too, again, I hope I'm not taking a verse out of context, but when the disciples come back to Jesus and they said, "Hey, has anybody given him food?" And he says, "I've got food you don't know about." I think he's talking about the work that contributes, the work that's not all about us, but it's the work that makes the world a better place. It does energize us the same way as food does. So I appreciate you sharing that. I had coffee with a friend and was telling him about this, and he put me on to someone I wasn't real familiar with. You all might be. Anyone familiar with Brother Lawrence? Tom? I should have known Tom was.
Tom knows everybody.
I know, yeah. Well, there's 2 quotes that Brother Lawrence, it's exactly what we're talking about here. One of them is real simple. It says, "And so it is not necessary to have great things to do. I turn my little omelet in the pan for the love of God." And then this poem, which I'm going to ruin this poem because I can't read poetry, but "Lord of all pots and pans and things, since I've no time to be a great saint, by doing lovely things, or watching late with thee, or dreaming in the dawn light, or storming heaven's gates, make me a saint by getting meals and washing up the plates. Warm all the kitchen with thy love, and light it with thy peace. Forgive me all my worrying, and make my grumbling cease. Thou who didst love to give men food in room or by the sea, accept the service that I do it unto thee. So we don't have to do great things. Everything that we do can be a contribution. But if we don't have a mindset of, how am I contributing? And we go into retirement thinking, how can I make this all about me? I just don't think you're going to enjoy that. We're just not meant for that. John, any last closing thoughts?
Be here next week.
All right. Thank you all. I do want to tell you, I got 2 more minutes, so I just want to say, for me personally, I don't know that I have been encouraged like this from a church. And it means probably more to me than you all realize. I got a text from Paul Stovall today saying, I can't be there tonight, but I'm praying for you, and I know it's going to go well. And many of you in the hallways have been encouraging to me. I needed that. That's contribution too, so thank you for that. You just won't know how much that it means. The best encouragement, though, I got was when my son came up to me tonight. They came in a little later, and he reached out and tapped my shoulder, and he said, "Are you excited about your class tonight?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "I'm excited for you, too." So if you didn't get a book, grab one, and I hope I'll see you next week. Thank you for being here.